How did you spend your day in London today? Because it's 11 here and 5 there. Like, what was a London Saturday like?
If I told you I was working, would it be sad?
If you told me you were laying in bed, I'd be like, that's like how most of my Saturdays are.
Well, here's what I did. Okay, here's what I did. So I woke up. Dre tried to convince me to go for a walk at 5:45 in the morning.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. This is what you get for marrying a yoga teacher.
well, no, so she went away to Greece, which is 2 hours ahead. So when you spend a couple of days in that time
Okay.
zone, you come back with a different kick.
Okay. Yeah.
So she's been waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my
Um,
God.
right. So I talked out of that, which was good. Um, made a coffee a little bit later. We've been watching The Bear.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've only watched a little bit of it, but I like what I see.
Can I? Yeah. First of all, it's great. And second, I would say I don't know about you, but I always, because I worked at Lil Burnett, we worked at Lil Burnett.
Right.
I get upset whenever I see a show set in Chicago that
Mm.
where the establishing shot doesn't have the Burnett building in it.
Mm, mhm,
Like, I feel
mhm.
like, no, I should be able to say, yeah, that's where I worked, but I can't.
Is it the establishing shot there, I feel like, has the Wrigley building in it, doesn't it?
No, I
No,
mean
what is
they
it?
various cuts.
It's more gritty. It's more gritty than
Yeah,
downtown.
but you gotta let the world know you're in Chicago. Like you can't
Yeah.
start in like Logan Square. You gotta
Mhm.
start
You gotta
on
start on the Miracle Mile.
yeah, yeah. You gotta if
Yes.
you don't start there, we don't know we're in Chicago.
We
We could
have
be
no idea where you are.
right. You could be in
Did
Boston.
you ever did you ever work in restaurant? Were you ever a restaurant worker?
I did. I did work in a restaurant, but it was a fast casual restaurant you might know called Olive Garden.
Of course. That's not I don't even call that fast casual. I call, like, Panera fast casual. Olive Garden's a restaurant.
Olive Garden is a restaurant. It actually is the number one wine cellar in the world. Did you know that?
Whoa.
I was a server, and one of my
Mhm.
friends was a server as well. Working in a restaurant is a different experience. I don't know. It's not something that you could go suggest to someone, but when you've had that experience, it's it's something else. Like the dynamics in the kitchen with like the bar staff and the chef and the waiters and the people washing dishes is very interesting, and management watching and getting tips and things. Yeah. Did you ever work in a restaurant?
Yeah, that was my first job was at a restaurant. So this is really funny, or I don't know, but my first job was a 50s themed restaurant. So I actually wore like a poodle skirt and like you had to dress up like in theme and they had like 50s music on a jukebox and like we served like milkshakes and hamburgers and stuff. Um,
That's
and yeah, and all the and it I mean, it was so tiring, like, the guys wore, like, white shirts and, like, little bow ties, and the girls dressed, like, as 50s girls, and I mean, it was, like, really exhausting to, like, dress up for work, like, you were, like, in costume at Disney World, and I maybe did that for a year, and then there was this other restaurant, like, it was kinda like an upscale pizza restaurant, I'm trying to think of something to compare it to. I mean, it was like Olive Garden level service, and I
okay.
went there, and waited tables there, like, from the time I was in high school to I would come back at college and wait tables there, and you made so much money. Like, I always tell people, like, you need to wait tables if you're like, that's your first job. You just make money, you know?
I will say though, there have been moments where I'll never forget. You had this. Me and my friend called them emotional tattoos. There are moments that you're never
Mm,
going to forget, and you revisit them, and they can be from various different things, but you always remember it. And I had a table. It was like a full family, where they almost had to push two tables together to accommodate the whole lot, and they would order everything. And Olive Garden always has the deals with the soup, salad, and bread, all this stuff where you can
yes.
just keep it
Shrimp
coming.
scampi.
Right. So the price never goes up, but the work on the actual waiter is like exponential. And so we're like serving all this stuff, and then you have like this woman that none of the silverware was clean enough for her, so she asked for like a little packet of sanitizer and a glass of hot water, and then she put all of her silverware in
Yeah,
glass, and I'm like, I know they're not dirty, but this is you, but it looks bad
right.
on me, and it's very visible. and I'm serving everyone, doing the best I can. And they came at like the tail end, and so the restaurant was shutting down. And as they were leaving, the guy whispered, he's like, "Left something there for you on the table." And I came back, and it was like a $1 bill.
Oh
and
my God.
and the thing is, like, if I thought he was trying to be an asshole, it wouldn't have hit. But I actually think they tapped out of money. That
You
was
think
all that was left.
you think they didn't have any money. I had a table once, and I think my dad, like, wanted to beat these people up. I had, like, this huge table, and they weren't happy with me clearly, but it was, like, one of those things that, um, the kitchen was backed up, blah, 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 and then they left, and they left me a penny right in the middle of the table. Like, clearly, they were trying to say, "F you, you're terrible." So I tell my dad, and I'm, like, 16, 17. I tell my dad later that night, and I mean, my dad wanted to go find them. He was like, "Well, where I mean, who were they?" Like, da 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 da. I'm like, "Dad, it's fine. This happens. Like when you're a waitress, it's not a big deal." Yeah. So we're supposed to talk about imposter syndrome, and we were going to talk about like our first jobs. Anyway, we kind of nailed that. Imposter syndrome, and a little bit about like the creative process and how it's like so baked into imposter syndrome too.
Yes.
Um, I am going to read to you. So this is my book, Overthinking in Your Underwear.
Ooh,
Um, and I'm going to read to you my definition of imposter syndrome that I have in here, first of all.
okay.
Ooh. So this is chapter 7, Overthinking Self-Doubt, where we talk a lot about imposter syndrome. The term imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon was originated by Dr. Suzanne Imes and Dr. Pauline Rose Clance in their 1978 article, The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women: Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention. Since then, Imes and Clance's publication, the definition of imposter syndrome has broadened to include almost everyone in their non-inclusive club of double doubters. Imposter syndrome wants to upend our self-worth and replace it with incessant insecurity. To get clinical on you, imposter syndrome is a common phenomenon where a person adopts persistent feelings of insecurity and self-doubt despite past success or in relation to their current skill set. They may be highly regarded in their field or industry, yet their success doesn't line up with their self-image. They have a blank slate mentality when it comes to their achievements. Even though they nail the speech, develop an idea, or make the sale, they must prove themselves worthy at the start of every new task. Um, so do you feel like you suffer from imposter syndrome?
Oh my gosh. Do I feel like I suffer from imposter syndrome? The short answer is yes. Okay.
Yes.
Short answer is yes. I was had an interview with a guy, and he described it as climbing up a greasy pole.
Mm.
Like you never, no matter what you do, you're always chasing. You feel like it's coming. You never get
You're
imposter.
never going to get there.
Right. And even when you make it, you've told yourself, I just made it. Like it was okay, but like I'm going to be found out. Um,
Right.
and it could be anything. Like, someone could say, "Oh man, I loved your stand-up comedy set. Do you want to do a showcase?" You'd be like, "Great." And it's like they heard your comedy, and you'd be like, "Yeah, but those weren't like we gotta stay."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, I mean, I have imposter syndrome about so many things. In the beginning of my career, it was so okay, I'm a copywriter in advertising. I'm a lot of other things too, but like in the beginning of my career, it was like almost paralyzing. Like I remember sitting in brainstorms and I almost couldn't say an idea because I would just be like, it's going to be the stupid I said. It's going to be the stupidest idea in the room. Everyone's going to laugh at me. Everyone's going to know I don't actually belong in this job. Job is a job of a copywriter. Like I just don't even deserve this. And I mean, it's so funny to me now because I'll literally be in a brainstorm now and I'll be like, I will say the most unhinged stuff. Like I've just gotten so far past that now. This is just in pertaining to being a copywriter. Do I
Mhm.
think I deserve a podcast? No, so much imposter syndrome there. But in being a copywriter, I think I've gotten over it because it's been 20 years. But in the beginning, I felt like I could not even open my mouth. I was so nervous to speak. And I talk about this in the book, but I got to the point where there was some point in my career, I mean, maybe 10 years in, that like it hit me that no one here knows what they're doing. Like, I have like this I have this big respect for authority, and I don't know where it comes from. My parents probably just instilled it in me. So I would go in and it'd be like, the boss is the boss. The boss knows what he's doing. Everybody's so smart. And then one day I'm just sitting there go, no one knows what they're doing. No one has any idea what's going on here. And
Making
like
it go along.
they are making it up. Like we're in a brainstorm and all these people are looking around going, I hope someone comes up with an idea because I have no idea. And
Yeah.
when I realized that, I was like, oh, well, that makes it a lot easier.
That's the thing when you're in the room and there happens. So what'll happen, or what tends to happen to me, and I've worked to break it, is you'll be in a meeting, right? And you'll have something stewing, but you're like, ooh, do I say it? And someone will talk, and all of a sudden it's like they're literally throwing shovels of dirt on your grave, and you're like, how do I dig out to like to show that I'm like still alive? And by the time you say that one thing, it is like a zombie coming up from the ground, like, where is this guy coming from? So I'm
Yeah.
like trying to, I tell myself, say something in the room as early as you can so people are already familiar with your voice.
Yeah.
That- yeah,
Yeah.
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 I'm
Absolutely.
I
And I also say in the book, like people will remember your efforts rather than your errors.
yeah.
Like people will remember like that that guy just tries. Like he's always chiming in, blah blah blah. They're not going to be like dummy. Like they're going to remember that people made an effort and that you're always trying and you're always like coming up with stuff and whatever. You're trying to come up with stuff even if it's not the big idea. I mean this is all very advertising centric, but I'm sure in other industries you're supposed to raise ideas. Um but just open your mouth. Like just open your mouth and start trying, I think.
There's something that's really interesting about that thought. Scientists have like a journal of like failed hypotheses. Okay.
Mhm.
And when we think about science, we think about all of the innovations and everything that they've come up with, but not all of the things that they tried and failed. And
Yes.
that failure was like to what science is just as important. But to the layman, they're really only thinking about your successes. So it's you need to say things, and it's okay that they're wrong. It's not that you have to say the right thing, but you have to put your thinking out on the table, like, because even if it's wrong, that does allow people to move with something. There's this idea about, if you're in a room full of people coming up with an idea, they say, where do we want to go to eat? The idea is, put the McDonald's idea. You throw McDonald's out on the table and immediately they can react to it and say, no, we're not eating McDonald's. And now you're building off of something because it was.
Yes. Exactly. Say the wrong thing. It's fine. Yeah. Um, so like I said, I think I probably have overcome the imposter syndrome of being a copywriter, but then there's the trying of being an author and being a podcaster. And I have so much imposter syndrome when it comes to that, and that I don't deserve to put the book out or to hold the microphone or anything like that. But I mean, I think you just have to do it, and you have to know that your first podcast is going to be terrible, and you have to just keep trying. I mean, there's you're not going it, you're it's like the cliche of like you're going to miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You're never going to get better by not doing it.
Okay, here's another quote that I'm sure one of your listeners is like, oh, that's where he got it from. But I heard it a long time ago. And it was about the idea that you want to be a creator because you have taste. Okay. Um, so because you have taste, the first thing you create is going to be bad, and it's not going to meet your level of taste. And it's going
Mhm.
to put you off because you're going to think that you're trash. And
Mhm.
so I always wonder, like, I feel like the people that are actually trying to deliver have some sort of imposter syndrome because they don't meet the standards of what they want to bring forward.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah, so like it's almost not that you don't want that anxiety, but I find comfort in knowing that other people have imposter syndrome, and that's almost like they care, that
Mhm.
they're not trying to mooch, they're trying to contribute.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, like, knowing it's there and that it's natural and happens to everyone is kind of a step. An exercise I talk about in the book is, like, settle into your excuses.
Oh,
So, like, write down let's say I shouldn't be an author or whatever. I shouldn't be an author. Write down every reason you shouldn't be an author. And you'll probably realize the list isn't very long. Like I'm not talented or I didn't go to Harvard or whatever. And you'll realize that you're full of shit and that that you don't really have all these excuses of why you aren't qualified, and then make a list of all the reasons that you are. I've always been creative. I've been writing for years, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll kind of realize you're full of shit. And if you kind of look at your list of excuses that you're saying in your head of why you shouldn't do something, you can kind of get past things a little bit, I think.
So how did you make the leap to doing the podcast? Because obviously you would say you'd have imposter syndrome around doing a podcast, but you are in fact doing it. So what was the thing that said, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to break past this and go for it.
Well, I feel like for years, so I've been a copywriter. And I wrote a book years ago, like in my 20s, and it kind of almost got published and then didn't. And then I've toyed with like writing other stuff, and you and I did stand up. And I would do all these things, and I felt like I never like fully put my foot on the gas. Like everything that I need to do to make the thing happen, you have to do it. So to write a book and get like a platform. You need to write the book. You need to post on social media every day. You need to have a podcast. You need to do 3 TikToks a day. And I just made a commitment that like I wasn't going to do this half ass. Like if I'm going to write a book, like I am going to do all the stuff that I need to be out there. And I think for a long time, I knew I was creative. I knew I wanted to live a creative life, but I was like very small about it. Like they always talk about like playing small. And I would kind of like be like, I did this and I worked on this, but I don't want to show anybody. And like, I don't, like kind of like that. And I was like, I'm going to do all the things. Like I'm committed to doing all the things.
It's
And,
we have
go ahead.
I was going to say we have this idea um of what the other person is doing that we're not. Um
Mhm.
So, okay. So outside of my window at the office, it's like this nice little canal side, and it has like a little grassy place where people sit out, and it's kind of like a tourist destination. Every time I look out the window, it's packed full of people. Now, in my mind, those people have been sitting there from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and they're the exact same people. But really, they're just getting 15-minute increments of any of that at any one time.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I try to extrapolate that to like this imposter syndrome, I'm looking at somebody delivering this excellent stuff. And I literally think all their life is this excellence. And I don't think about the work that kind of goes behind it. So to your point, like chasing the podcast and how many times you need to do this a day, and like you can really like beat yourself up with what everybody has told you is the expectation.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be honest, I tried to do the book in a small way. I sent the book to publishers, and every single one, some of them are like, I really like it, but you need a platform. Like you have a private Instagram page with 500 followers that you probably gathered from your high school reunion. Like we know you. We know who you are. But that's not how the world works anymore. And I literally was like resentful at first, and I was like, well, that sucks. It sucks that just because you want to be a writer, you have to go on TikTok and you have to like join this whole social media movement that I really was like not into. Like I just wanted to write my stuff, and it made me kind of like, why is the world like that? Because everybody has to have a social media platform, it feels like. And then I was just like, well, I'm not going to make excuses. I'm going to just do it. And frankly, it's like, it's kind of fun when you don't take it too seriously. I'm not overthinking like what all the posts mean about me and what people think about like my hair or if I look stupid. It's just like, just do it. Just do it.
I mean, we're like 100% of what we think about and like a fraction of what anyone else ever thinks about.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why am I like I'm performing in a certain way, and if I'm behaving to the slither of their attention, how small do I get to be? You know,
Mhm.
That's what I'm going for. I'm in a similar role where I have I'm trying to put together a project that feels quite ambitious, and I'm like, well, I need to just kind of go out there and do it. Um,
You wanna
and
tell me what it is?
yeah, it's been ruminating in my head for a while, but the idea that I want to write a book, but
Okay.
I am not a writer. I've always written for the stage, and
Okay.
so the idea would be that in order to work the book out, I can't work it out like a writer. I have to work it out like a comedian. So to put all this stuff as a work in progress to mine the audience for my material. So basically going through my writing as if it was kind of stand up, conversational, and then using what came out of that to then kind of inspire the book instead of trying to go away and write in a cabin, to use that to kind of organize it. So almost making like small events to share what would go into the book, talking and dialoguing it out.
Is it like, do you wanna do, like, a biography kind of? Is it, like, autobiographical, or what do you want the book to have in it, do you think?
It it's going to be a mapping of how I think. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and I'm saying all of this stuff. It hasn't the
That's
world
okay.
premiere.
It's
Um,
working it out.
I've had this idea of a book for a long time. It's called "That's Why God Made You Black."
I love
Yep.
the title.
It's the title comes from an insult, obviously. An insult that someone would say, like, "Oh, that's why God made you black." Like you do
Oh,
something
okay.
small, like a small little thing to someone else, and they'll say, "Oh, that's why God made you black."
Oh,
Um,
I didn't know that was an insult.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it's one of these kind of, and like it's like a light insult, but one of those kind of like one that's in passing, right?
Okay.
But I like the concept of saying that, like, God made me black. He made my mom black, and my mom's black, and my mom's black, to warn you about this moment right here, and you still didn't listen. Like, how is, what I'm saying? Like, if you knew that's why, this reason why I was made black, you couldn't see it coming. And so everything that I'm trying to put into this book is a bit meta. It's writing about myself. It's writing about the black experience, but also like this dark humor. And so they're kind of
Right.
these swirling pots of like a bit, things are a bit self-referential. So trying not to write myself into a corner with the concept, but it's stringing together everything I've done through stand-up comedy, all of my different starts and stops, and saying this is the narrative and these are the three lines that we're hanging everything on to. And that's the book. It's about this idea of imposter syndrome. I have been thinking about this and wanting to do this for a while, and there was a shirt that I was wearing that said writer. I got it out of a thrift shop, and it said writer, and it said WB. And this guy, he asked me, he's like, oh, what do you write? And I said, tweets.
Tweets.
But like, you're right. I made it so small, but I'm like, everything that the way I approach Twitter, and then we can get on to whatever, is I don't use it for the audience. I use it as an outlet and the format. I
Mhm.
appreciate the format, and it feels like I'm getting something out of my book. If one person likes a tweet, I love it. If it connects with anybody. And so making Twitter small, making that phrase, that sentence small, like just do it is a short sentence. Just do it to tweet, right?
Mhm.
So I need to make that feel bigger. And this is what that is.
I'm still thinking about, like, all of the I love it. Like, so overthinking in your underwear, I didn't have the title right away, but, like, I mean, a year or 2, maybe it was 3, I was like, I knew, like, I wanted to write a self-help book that was, like, narrative and funny and, like, advice, and, like, people would say, like, "Oh, what do you" I don't know, "Are you working on anything?" Whatever, and I would say, "I wanna write," and I would, like, describe it, and then one day in the pandemic, I was like, "Well, you got time. You're never gonna write a book if you don't write it right now." And then I just started writing it. So just to your point, like, things will roll around in your head, and then one day it'll just, like, it'll hit go, you know? So I think it's good. It's good that you're like, you have it up there and it's gonna come out. Like, go forward. This is a great idea. You have all the talent. You need to let people see it.
Now, okay, so in that, and now I'm literally going on it, right? But and this is where I guess imposter syndrome kicks in. Like, it's not just going to be a book. I wanted to have more to it. I wanted there to be art to it and everything. And then when you start talking about art, you're like, are you an artist? Or like, what is the
Do
art?
you do art, or are you saying you wanna incorporate, like, art you like?
Yeah, well, I wanna do some art in it, or
Okay.
you work with an artist, and, like, as you start talking about a project, like, the vision of it, like, how perfect it is in your mind, and thinking about trying to execute, that's when the imposter syndrome, like, again, like we were saying, that taste, like, you want it to be good, and then you feel like, "Oh, well, I'm this big, so I can't
But
execute."
that's the great thing about, like, where I don't resent where our media is today because, like, kind of like what I'm doing now, I'm not saying my stuff is great, but I'm saying, like, overthinking in your underwear, I'm kinda, like, making it a platform. Well, so God made you black. That's why God made you black, the platform. On TikTok, on social, on whatever, you're sharing art, you're talking to artists, you're, like, doing all this thing. It's not just a book, it's not just contained in a book. It's, like, all of the idea of it, the essence of it spreads out across the platform that is Owen Black. I mean, you can make it big because of how social media and how social media works today. It doesn't have to be contained in this small thing.
Exactly, there's so
That's where
many.
I don't resent social media.
Social media has done a really good job of tying everything together, and, one thing I am fortunate about, and I made it early, is I got one username that's universal across all platforms. So if you're looking for me, OMBLK, that's where you'll find me.
Right.
Twitter, Instagram, even Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, it's the same thing. So I'm like, okay, great. I don't have to, that's one hurdle I don't have to. But also,
Exactly.
it is very much tied to myself.
Well, that's okay because I started off as overthinking in your underwear and then I changed everything to my name because it was too long for some platforms. And then I started thinking about what if when I want to do other projects, I don't wanna be confusing. So I have overthinking in your underwear, the URL, and then everything else is Lindsay Bruno. So I think
So
you're good, is my
when
point.
you started overthinking in your underpants, underwear, sorry.
I
I
think
like,
it's cuter that you say underpants, though.
well, the funny thing over here, they say pants.
They say
When
underpants?
they say pants, they're referencing underwear, and they call trousers the things that go on top.
Well, you know what's funny? I want you don't forget what you're about to say, but I think it's funny when I look at your, stories and your stuff, like, you're referencing, like, London things or British things, and I'm like, he's making a British joke and I or something that's going on in Britain, and I don't know what it is. I'm sure it's funny, but, like, you're saying something like that, like, in the vernacular, it's funny.
It's, yeah, and it's having that crossover audience. It's like, okay, you gotta kind of play it in the middle just a bit. Um, but how so what was your point where you said, right? Was it the pandemic where you're like, okay, this is the go moment? But and did you kind of what was your process? As a
Okay, so, like I said, I knew I wanted so I had read about a bunch of books like this, like, I don't know if you read it because it's kinda girly. There's a book called You're a Badass. Have you ever read that book?
I haven't.
Okay. Dre might have read it. So You're a Badass. There's a lot of books that are in this like self-help narrative kind of thing where you tell your story and then you kind of give advice or whatever. Even Amy Schumer's book is kind of similar. What's it called? It's around here. It's called The Girl with the Lower Back Tattoo. It's really funny. But she kind of gives like advice and then but tells a funny story with it. So I was like, "Oh, I want to do that. I know I can do it." So like I said, I knew I could do that. Then pandemic hit. I kind of said to myself, you got to do it now. And so I started writing. First I started writing the stories I knew I wanted to tell. Like I have a story about passing out in a cab. I have a story about being at a date auction. Like I knew the stories I wanted to tell. Then I started writing the advice I knew I wanted to give. Then I started kind of melding them together. Um, at some point, I just got like well, what's the thing that ties this all together? Like, what's the title? And then I started thinking, it's really just me like being, I was going to be kind of trying to do like neurotic, like a neurotic girl's guide to whatever. And then I'm like, well, I'm overthinking. And then I just like the overthinking in your underwear. Um, yeah, and then I then like, when I start something, I get really obsessed with it, and then I just was obsessed with it, and I mean, I finished it, and then you have to edit it a million times. Writing is editing. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah.
That and then also like I look at some books and I'm like, the ones I admire, and I'm like, ooh, you almost get into this same thing with comedians. Like if you listen to a comedian enough, when you get on stage, you'll start to sound like them,
Mm-hmm.
and then you kind of get to this point where, oh, now I'm sounding like myself, and I'm finally at the point where I'm like, I'm sounding like myself.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite good.
Some good advice for writing, I read this somewhere, is like, if you want to know what you want to sound like or your genre. So like, I don't know if there's a genre of books that you want to be like your book. So I kept reading, like I didn't want to read thrillers during the time that I was writing this. Like I read Amy's book, I read Tina Fey's book. I read like a lot of books that I knew I wanted to keep that tone of voice going. Um because yeah, and it is really helpful. Like it's really helpful to just like keep that tone of voice in your head and like keep learning things about, so like I read a lot of self-help books during the time, like stay in your genre while you're writing that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that makes sense. And another thing with kind of inspiration um is what medium are you drawing from? So there are like certain musicians that I'm like, okay, I like the way you put that together. When it comes to writing, you have to say, okay, music, hip hop, how they string concepts together. Um, like I feel like there's almost like what's your diet? What is your creative diet? What are you
Mhm.
bringing in? And it's like you can read things, but then you have to listen to some stuff and look at some stuff just to make sure that you have a varied diet. Sorry, the thing about mugs on video calls, I feel like that is the flex that people have.
I know, I get really self-conscious about whatever I'm drinking out of. Let me see
Oh,
yours.
it's you know,
What's TIFF? TIFF is like art. It's art, right?
the Toronto International Film Festival.
Yeah. Oh, it's a film festival.
Yeah, and so it's like, you say something smug and then you slowly bring it up to your mouth and sip slowly.
Yes. I had a mug the other day I was drinking out of that said "World's Best Grandpa" because I'd taken it from my parents' house, and I was like, "It's a little." Tried to turn it around so no one could see it.
Like, also, I have a thing. We don't like identical mugs in like the house. Like all of our
You want
other,
unique.
yeah, each one is unique. No one gets the same mug. I think that's important.
Mhm. No, I
Mm.
think it's important too. So I was just looking at my notes. I saw this piece of advice on Instagram. Sorry that I'm not giving the person whatever. That each year you should pick one peak activity, and it's like the focus of your year. So if you're like you and I, like maybe 2024, your peak focus is write a book. And maybe my peak focus is like refine this podcast. And if you're not like us, maybe your peak focus is run a marathon or climb Mount Kilimanjaro. But it keeps you energized, it gives you something to get up for, it keeps you passionate, and then the guy was saying, like, imagine if you did that every year and 30 years later, you look back at your life and the amount of, like, peak moments you will have gathered and the amount of things you will have accomplished, and I thought that was really cool and really good advice, and as someone who kind of lives for the next project, I really liked that.
Right. I like the idea of having the vision boards.
Mhm.
Now I have never properly done a vision board.
I
Um,
haven't either.
right. But at the end of the year, when you look back on your year, what you achieved is also what you were thinking about. So that like
Mhm.
aligns with his peak moment. So if you're like really focused on money and all of a sudden and getting money at the end of the year, it's like, oh, I've saved something. It's like, yeah, because well, your mind was set on that. N-
Mhm.
Same thing with bad things, right? Like you sometimes, we like to look at misfortune as something that happened to us, but did we
Did
contribute
you
to any of
call it
that?
in? Yeah.
Right.
I think self-worth and imposter syndrome is directly tied to not getting paid your worth at a job. You're just kinda like, "No, it's cool, pay me that, I'm not gonna ask for more," or if you ask for a raise and they don't give it to you, you're like, "Okay." Like, I did that for so long,
Mhm.
to the point that this happened to me. I was working really, really hard in an ad agency. A guy, and I don't like to do a lot of, like, crazy stuff like this, but a guy was in my position working not hard at all, And he, in passing conversation, because we were really good friends, told me what he made. Like, he kind of went, "Well, yeah, and I know because I make this, I need to do this for my taxes," or he said something like this. And he was getting paid like $10,000 more than me. And that was the day I stopped trying. I will tell you that. And I very soon after switched jobs. Um, and I had asked for a raise recently and they had told me no. And I was so upset and felt very taken advantage of. But anyway, I think self-worth and imposter syndrome all kind of ties to not asking for what you want at a job. Have you ever experienced that?
I mean, all the time. And then again, they people don't talk about money in this country, so you never know.
In your country, in London?
In the UK, no, they do not talk about money.
Okay.
No, they do. It's that's I wouldn't say they're notorious about talking about money. I would say that they hate poverty. They hate the poor.
Really?
Oh my God.
Okay.
It's that that's a long story, but you could unpack that. But if you read about the concept of poverty in Britain, they hate the poor
Well,
as a
because there's a lot of still, like, classism there that, like, you can't move between the classes like how you can in the US. Is that correct?
there isn't a in America, everybody's told like, oh man, you can go achieve, you can get that. And so a lot of people from the UK look at America as like, oh, they want to go there. Obviously there's, things that they don't like about America for sure. But there's an opportunity where in the UK it's like kind of entrenched. But it's really, and I would say, it's it's not a hot statement to say it's hostile towards poverty and the poor.
Mhm.
Now where we going with this? Okay, so the conversation about money. So people don't talk about money because they see it. I would even say the UK sees itself more as a meritocracy than the US does. Okay, so they've done research around that. Um, so you don't talk about money because it seems like it's a reflection on yourself. So now we come back to this idea of self worth. Okay, people that have imposter syndrome and self-worth, they want to deliver value. They don't want to let anybody down. They want to be able to, again, to be what they say they are. They don't want to fail anybody. And I think that's a part of it. Like when they have to rise to the occasion, they can do it, but they don't want to overpromise. No, keep going.
Okay. Do you wanna tell me anything about we talked about first jobs, and, being waiters and waitresses, or the everyone's called a waiter now, I think. Okay.
Okay.
Um,
The server.
servers. Okay, we're all servers. What were other jobs you had, and did you have, like, any imposter syndrome associated?
Phew, s- strategy. Moving into
Well, you're
strategy.
yeah, moving into strategy.
Moving into
So,
strategy.
Owen and I, like I said, we're both in advertising, and you were an account person, an account side person. Then you moved into strategy, which I think is so interesting. And that was hard or harder, challenging?
What I would say is when I was in account management, I was an actual imposter because that was not the job for me.
I kind of always thought that. I thought, like, you should be a creative or you should be something else.
Right. And then when I moved into strategy, uh, there is there's so much stuff that like it's kind of hard to get into strategy. Like oftentimes people are working in
Yeah.
account management and they're like, oh wait, how did you get into strategy? And everybody sounds like they knew a guy, they snuck in through the side door. So you just kind of figure it out. But then when you get here, from what I've heard, this is one of the roles with the most imposter syndrome there is because the creative is judged by what is in front of you. Okay. People can
Mhm.
say whether they like it or not, they can rate it. All right. The account person, did you get this email? Or things running on track? But when it comes to the strategy, I've heard somewhere that 9 out of 10 strategies don't work. And you're pulling all these numbers out of the air to kind of give the direction to the whole thing. And people
And sorry, I was gonna interrupt you really quick. And people 9 out of 10 people, I think, don't really understand it.
they don't really, or there are people that don't even like
They
strategy.
don't really get it. So, like, you could yeah, I mean, the people that get it, like I get it, obviously. I really appreciate it, and it's, like, so, so, so important to the process, but I think you could also go up there and just say complete bullshit, and a client would be like, "That was great." Like, so many people don't get it too,
Right.
you know?
And like even when I'm explaining my job to other people, I explain everyone else's job and then say, "Well, I'm the guy that did," like in context, just to
What
say
do you
where,
say? You're the guy that what?
well, like,
Gives research to it and
and yes,
makes
yeah,
meaning behind it.
right. But I feel like I put the context to everyone else because I feel like the job in and of itself is too soft on the side. So therefore you feel vulnerable in that role.
Yeah.
And so when you come up against other strategists, everyone sounds smart because they're all trying to sound smart because they're all in
Mm,
the same
mm,
kettle. You're just surrounded by a bunch of imposters.
mm,
And so they do something and then he does something, and then you do something. And then also there's not one way to do the job.
mm. Oh,
So,
so true.
right. And so you're comparing yourself to somebody whose mind maps itself completely different. Someone could be completely about data. Whereas for myself, I'm about context and figurative, the figurative narrative and metaphors to build up what we're trying to do. And that looks completely different. And it it is strategy is as much as a blank page as the creative is as much as a
It
blank.
really, really I like data, but I also just like the psychology of strategy of like, this is the insight of why someone is gonna buy this, or this is where the direction the creative needs to go because this is really what's gonna make people buy this or whatever. Then as a creative, you go, "Oh, yeah, 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 I get that. That's a really good insight, and now we're gonna build everything off of that." That's how strategy should work, right?
Mhm. And then also the idea of an imposter is, okay, is it okay to be enough, right?
Mhm.
Climbing up this greasy pole, like, at what point do you say, I've done exactly what I needed to do? Did I have to deliver more? Where do I define what good is? That's like if there's no definition, no end goal, no finite definition for what good is, that's another little treadmill that you're running.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was reading imposter syndrome on verywell.com, and they were talking about how it affects a lot of like perfectionists. Speaking of another conversation, what do you want to talk about next time? We can talk about the progress on your book.
We could talk. I don't know how far. What? Well, I'm planning a writer's retreat for myself,
Okay.
um, which I think is going to start off first with just mapping out everything that I've written and bucketing it, and thinking through the organization of how, because it's good when it comes out. It's going to be funky. Okay, it's gonna have,
Yes.
I'm really, because I can see it in my head. Um, and so I'm like, let's get some of these head drawings down on paper and see if like they actually work out. Um, but I want it to be, oh boy, there's a book that I've thank you for talking with me, talking this through, because
No,
this
I
is
love it.
kind of cathartic because I haven't talked at this pace with anybody but my wife about it. Talking
Yeah.
to the side of her head about the book. But there's a book called Gödel Escherbach. Okay,
Mhm.
it's a book about artificial intelligence and math, but it's written with like puzzles inside and stories, like little parables, and it has art. And I'm thinking about making a book that says, right, this is going to be an experience. It's not just going to be one thing that you read through, but there's going to be a couple of layers that illustrate the same point as we go through. So I'm going to map out how that comes together. And that's the first writer's retreat.
Yeah. I think you should like look at that book on Amazon and then look at more books like this and see if you can like find a few books that are like that so you can gain more insights and like stuff like that.
And
Inspiration.
I need to read. I don't get to read on my commute, and I find some way to make myself busy all the time. Then I'm reading for work. But I think I need to just say enough research, enough trends, enough nonfiction. Like, let's dive into something else a little bit more
Yeah.
literary.
Literary. Yeah, I'm excited for you.
I'm excited for myself. Like,
Yeah, I think I might start well, because I was realizing I was putting so much effort into this podcast, which I'm gonna continue to do, that I was missing writing. So I just started, like, writing a little bit on the plane the other day when I was traveling, and so I'm just gonna start writing a little bit more and, see where it takes me. But, yeah, that's all really.
It's you when you're like in copywriting or writing stand-up comedy, you don't realize how much you're writing until you're like, oh, actually, I write a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. If you're like, "Hey, I wanna talk about," whatever.
Yeah, yeah, I will. I'll put some stuff out there. I think
Yeah.
we're gonna have an interesting conversation next time. It's
Well,
gonna
we
be
always do. We're always like, "The here and here and here," whatever.
it's, that's how the book is gonna be structured.
No, it'll be good. I can't wait.
Good, good. Listen, it's
Okay.
always next time.
Always good to see you. Yeah, enjoy your evening in London.
I will. I might be doing a little bit of work before I actually, because I didn't do it. I didn't do what I need to do on Friday. Is what happened. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye.